Right. Thanks for jumping on, Byron. And thanks everyone for joining us. We're in our Working with Targeted and Traditional Grazers panel. We'll be hearing from Byron, Chase, Emma, and Sarah. And first, we'll be hearing from Byron. I'll be running through a few questions, but I know there's going to be a few slides as well that Byron will be sharing. So Byron Palmer runs Grounded Land and Livestock, which focuses on agricultural logistics and services, as well as Grounded Grass-Fed, which sells direct market high-end grass-fed beef. Byron also works as a regenerative land and grazing manager with the nonprofit Sonoma Mountain Institute, where they restore grasslands using herbivores. Here, Byron has helped improve the vegetation diversity more than 300% on the home ranch and expand their land base over 800%. He also served as a holistic cattle sourcing for Mindful Meats as a sustainable local beef company. And before that, he managed ranch operations for a local CSA, where he co-led the growth of a 600-person CSA to 1,000 customers. And welcome, Byron. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm just trying to get my screen up here to share. Can you?
I will stop my share
Yeah, is
as
that
well.
working?
There it
Yep.
is.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Roxanne. I really appreciate you guys asking me to be here. I'm grateful to be here in support of getting better grazing on the land. And you asked me to answer a number of questions. I'll do my best to answer some of those. You talked a little bit already, but I work for SMI as a grazing and land manager. It was started in 2001. I've been here since 2013. And like you said, I've helped grow that program. We've gotten some interesting increases in biodiversity here. We believe that increasing natural capital, that we're increasing natural capital value on the land by quite a bit, but it doesn't show up on the P&L. In any given year, we monitor over 120 vegetation monitoring points, and we run in the neighborhood of 1,600 to 1,800 head of cattle. I also operate a for-profit business like you were talking about. You covered a little bit of that. And I guess the other thing I just want to say is this is how I see it. Uh, Take what's useful, leave the rest. I don't expect you to agree with everything I say. I'm wrong about probably 30% of this, and it's up to you to figure out which 30% that was. Um, Roxanne, I wanted to answer some of these questions. Your first question,
Well, I think, yeah, you've told us a little bit about your background and,
yep.
your current operation, but, maybe we can dive into, how does your operation compare to other cattle operations, maybe within Sonoma and broader. We've got, folks from Greater Bay Area and California here too.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. Okay. I will do that. I'll talk a little bit about our operation here. I guess as I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about the ecological context that we operate in because it matters to our operation. As we have this conversation today about grazing and land management, I think, it's important to frame it through the lens of our historical ecosystem context, and the ecosystem services that we're all currently looking for today. Because we're often asking commodity economic activities to cover the costs or repair broken ecosystems. And the cost structures of those two things are often unrelated. And everybody on this call knows this, but I think it just bears repeating. The ecosystems that we all interact with on the daily, they're missing some of the keystone species, and more importantly, the relationships between those species that historically kept everything in a healthy, functional balance without our human effort. So, as far as we understand, right, humans very rapidly altered the megafauna. As soon as we came across the land bridge to North America, we showed up with our prefrontal cortexes and pointy sticks, and a lot of murder went down. Giant sloths, mammoths, camels, horses gone on this continent. Everybody knows that. But when you destroy a role player in a given ecosystem, if you want that service that it was providing, you assume the energy load that the animal was providing naturally. And there's a lot of folks that say that cultural burning was a response to the extinction of three orders of animals off this continent and the loss of the vegetation management that they help cycle. So if we destroy relationships, we have to manage them. This will segue into the work we do and how we're a little bit different. But just to be clear, like that's what I'm talking about here today is assuming the energy load and the costs of the destroyed functional relationships, and that energy load just doesn't match up with contemporary economic systems that we're trying to make pay for it a lot of the time. Just a basic example, when we talk about things like fuel load reduction, we're talking about the ecosystem services of herbivores. Another example is a tree. A tree does a lot. But one selfish primary function is that it provides shade. So if the tree is removed, it gets hot, and now you need to build a shade structure to replicate the tree's cooling benefits, which requires additional time, resources, etc. Right? And so I think the relevance to the work that we do at the nonprofit Sonoma Mountain Institute is, similarly, our goals like fuel load reduction or biodiversity increases through annual vegetation management, these were historically achieved through natural processes and relationships. And today, modern day land managers or landowners, we have to recreate these processes through intentional effort. And that involves considerable time, money, energy, attending RCD workshops, right? So achieving these ecological goals or ecosystem services we have, like I said, I'm probably going to say it 8 times just because I think it's important to presence. It's often disconnected from that commodity agricultural economics because they tend to be low cost and not designed to restore or manage ecosystems to meet your property's needs. So conflating the goals of economic return with like multi-layered property needs that have a high labor input, they often lead to challenges, especially if you live in an area that has like fragmented and smaller properties with complicated topographies in the area. That's a lot. That's a long preamble to your question, Roxanne. I'm a 15th generation over explainer on my father's side, but it provides the context for this next part, which is we compare to other operations in the region, sort of through the general lens that we're a nonprofit, and I think it's important to emphasize and overemphasize that. We are focused on ecological improvement. Unlike traditional operators, we are specifically designed to produce ecological outcomes. And that means that we have more time, more energy, and resources to focus on these goals. It is not better than a traditional operation. It is just different. And it's impossible, in my opinion, to expect a traditional operation that is trying to run a business to do what we do. It's not a fair assessment. So our model is different by design. We're not suggesting others should adopt our approach. Traditional operations throughout the county can and do a great job, in various contexts. Another thing that makes us a little different, and I think this is something you were alluding to, Roxanne, we're a stalker outfit seasonally. That's different than a cow-calf operation, which a lot of local operations are, right? So we bring in animals in December, we ship them out in June. We try to avoid the dry season for a number of reasons. Nutrition is suboptimal, right? Their rumens don't have enough protein to break down the cellulose in the lignified grass. You need a lot of supplementation. Fire risk is high. Water resources are low. The majority of the operations in the area are cow-calf operations, and these operations manage cattle through all seasons. There's benefits to taking your forage over 12 months, but there's obviously unique challenges as well. This was the next question, right, Roxanne? How we compare to, like, on the other side, like targeted grazing operations, goats and sheep?
Yeah, just kind of understanding kind of some of those nuances. You described the cow calf, more traditional versus the stalker, and then yeah, the other comparison, and we'll hear more about that from Chase, Emma, and Sarah. But what a targeted grazing
Yeah.
operation.
Yeah. Well, forgive me in advance, Chase, Emma, and Sarah, if I miscategorize what you do or how you do it. I apologize. So our operation probably sits somewhere between a traditional set stocking operation and a targeted grazing operation. We're larger in scale to targeted grazing operations. That allows us to manage more extensive landscapes, and we do it at less density than sheep or goat targeted grazers. Um, we're usually at more density than a traditional operation. In the spring, when the ground can withstand, 1,000 animals in one place, our average duration in paddock might be 2 days or 3 days. Right now, it's more like 7 days because it's really wet and a lot of animals can make a mess. Um, Smaller targeted grazing operations that come to your HOA and graze your boundary, we're not going to do that. We provide this focused grazing effort on larger areas. I think one of the, there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to scale up sheep and goat operations in the area, but lack of infrastructure. So perimeter fencing is not set up for them, and predation is just horrendous on those outfits. So yeah, I would say we exist a little bit in the middle. And I think your next question, was this it? When does it make sense for the operator to pay versus the landowner?
Yes, yeah. I think you described kind of what you need and what might be different from other operations in terms of fencing and water and all of that. But yeah, if you want to get into the weeds of it and talk about those kind of the financial aspects of it and when does it make sense to pay versus be paid,
Yeah.
that's of interest.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is a super juicy topic. I feel like it gets to the core of the issue around restoring natural capital and traditional economics and how it all intersects. This is a picture I used, Chat GPT. It made sure this rancher had no right hand, which is moderately disturbing. I think the answer to this question, it's important to center on some local economics. This is an economic analysis I put together with a combination of folks I got input from. I updated it recently. I do not expect that you're going to be able to look at these numbers right now in detail. I'm happy to share them later if somebody's interested and talk through them. But I put them together based on a 1,000-acre operation in Marin or Sonoma County. It has 100 cows. It accounts for choring the animals 1 day a week in terms of the labor cost that's included. And it includes that costs that ranchers normally don't charge themselves. So if the rancher owns the ranch, they're typically not charging themselves the opportunity cost for the pasture. This model accounts for that. Like, say they're leasing 1,000 acres from someone. It covers a portion of their pickup, a portion of their ATV cost, the cost of buying 100 animals on a 5-year note at 10% interest, and a small portion of the infrastructure costs that are borne every year. It's worth noting that this is the best cattle market in history right now, and even with all-time high cattle prices, an operator's taking home $10,000 on 1,000 acres if they do all the labor. So if you adjust this model and say 5-year average cattle prices, which is much more fair assessment, the operator's actually losing 8 grand on 1,000 acres if they do all the labor. And I have a whole bunch of other models here, including one which I wasn't planning on talking about, but it's worth mentioning. If you increase carrying capacity by 50% through being there every day and running the labor, because you need to be there every day, moving them, managing them. If you increase labor but increase carrying capacity, which is the standard promise of like regenerative grazing, you hemorrhage tons of money. And I'd be happy to share that as well. But I think it's important to keep in mind, because if you're a landowner and you're requesting more effort and more labor out of your cattle operator or manager, it's important to understand it costs them a minimum of like $200 to start and get in their pickup. So as we talk about changing grazing for ecological outcomes, the only economic model that actually makes sense that I've ever seen in this area anyway is the lowest labor model available. And that's what most people do because it makes a ton of sense. And I'm not advocating for it. I'm just trying to explain the context in which we're asking this question about when does it make sense for your neighbor to pay. So if we talk about opposite ends of the spectrum in order to frame the conversation, if you've got 10 acres in Glen Ellen, 4 of it are forested, and you've got 3 acres of grass, that is hands down a liability. No one should be paying you to graze those acres. That grass is uneconomic volume of material. And I personally don't think it really makes sense for a cattle operator to pay until you start getting into the hundreds of acres. If an operator has to truck animals in, that's expensive. If they have to manage fences or install fences, that's expensive. If they have to address a water situation, manage insecure water that's constantly breaking, that's expensive. But alternatively, if you as a landowner have 50 acres that is well fenced with reliable water that is next to your neighbor, and all they have to do is open a gate and come in, it might be worth it for the cattle operator to pay you for that due to the low cost to capture and the low friction. I will say there are people that are out there willing to lose money on the activity, and you might be able to meet them, and they're great folks, and they have needs that are uneconomic for your 20 or 40 acres. That's awesome. This was that next question, right? Roxanne, the smallest size parcel considered adequate?
Yeah, yeah, and you did touch on that, but
Okay. All
we're
right.
getting
Yeah, we
close to our
can.
time, but I think we've
Yep.
got
All
a little
right.
bit of wiggle room. There've been no questions, so I think our
There's been
Q&A
no questions.
session
That sounds
is
that's we're sleeping. We're sleeping. Next time it'll come
time to go,
with some
Monday.
Adderall. I so I'll just talk real. I'll skip that. Biggest challenges to our operation: broken and disconnected land base with small parcels. We attempt to combine parcels together and prioritize larger parcels, poor infrastructure, fences, water, corrals. We try and work with owners who are able to help support those improvements. Not everyone is. And we work with NRCS and RCD to deal with that poor infrastructure. Access for trucks and trailers to get animals in is big. And so when we put properties together, we try to make sure at least one of them has good access. If you collaborate with neighbors, one person's access can be everybody's. Um, you asked about grazing agreements. I can talk more about them in the Q&A, but this I just recommend go to California Farm Link, download the Regen grazing lease. It's a great it's a great option. It has a lot in there. We contributed quite a bit to that. And then I guess this last section, wrapping it up. Do I have one more minute, Roxanne, or?
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So here's what I'd say about the most important thing for landowners to know. Just don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It's important to get started, take action, even if the results aren't perfect. Your grazing doesn't need to be flawless. Like just getting progress and learning is important. If you're leaving some residual cover and not overgrazing every year, you're probably making progress. The next big thing I would say is just work with your neighbors. The benefit of collaborating with your neighbors is huge. If you're taking fragmented land bases, putting them together in more functional units. You don't have to love your neighbor or even like get along with them politically, but there's benefits by collaborating. My standard advice for folks that are looking for grazing support is like, if your neighbor has animals next door, work with them. It's going to be your lowest friction, lowest cost, highest value option 9 times out of 10. And then the last thing I'll say is just understanding the trade-offs and your goals and how they relate to the economic context. So I think one of the most challenging things I know for me is often I'll have two goals and they will see them the same, but they're actually opposing in how you carry them out tactically. And so one of the things I'm constantly reminding myself is I can't have everything and that every goal has its own enabling conditions. And sometimes they're in conflict. So just trying to remember that I think is important. So I appreciate everybody. I hope, you found the 30% of things that were incorrect. I look forward to hearing from Chase, Emma, and Sarah. And thanks for asking me the questions, Roxanne.
Thanks so much, Byron.
Yeah.
And just for everybody there, participants, we'll be holding our questions and we'll answer them at the tail end of this panel. And next, we're going to be hearing from Chase and Emma. So Chase and Emma own Chase and Goat Grazing, a family-owned and operated business providing land management services. They are based in Santa Rosa and are dedicated Sonoma County natives passionate about agricultural and animal science. And both Chase and Emma pursued their undergraduate degrees in animal science at Cal State Fresno. And through their hard work and commitment to sustainable practices, Chase and Emma contribute to environmental stewardship while fostering their love for agriculture. And we've got kind of a line of questions similar to what you heard Byron talk through. But, first off, we'd just love to get a little bit more about you guys, your background, and your operation.
Yeah, as you said, we both graduated from Cal State Fresno with animal science degrees. And we started Chasing Goat Grazing in 2015. Me and my grandpa started when I was going to the junior college as kind of a little summer project, and then it progressed from there. And then we kind of took it further after school and decided that's what I wanted to pursue for a while. And we've now grown, run about 1,000 to 2,000 animals, depending on the year. And yeah, that's kind of what we did there, and just trying to provide good land management and good practices to Sonoma County to keep producing, the county that we love.
Thanks. Can you tell us a little bit more about the range of services that you provide with those 1,000 to 2,000
Yeah,
animals?
yeah. So we provide anything from coming to like a 1 acre piece of property to 100 to 500 acre property with goats, sheep, and we've now started venturing into cattle. Me, Emma, and my sister Gianna started a different little, I guess, company that we're venturing that way as well. And so, yeah, we're kind of do government agencies, businesses, and landowners, primarily doing targeted grazing for fire fuel mitigation, but as well as trying to just help people manage their land.
Do you want to speak a little bit more about targeted grazing? We heard a little bit from Byron, kind of about his side of things, maybe with more of the seasonal stocker operation. But how does your operation compare to other targeted grazers or other, in general, just grazers in the region, and why might you use targeted grazing or your services?
Yeah, our targeted grazing operation, we use H2A labor. So that's guys or gals that want to come for work from different countries, and they stay with the animals, move them around. We use smaller paddocks and try to focus in on 1 to 2 acre high density, so 2 to 400 animals in a paddock, and then move them within 1 to 3 days, depending on the vegetation, if it's brush or grass, stuff like that. And pretty much we primarily focus on fire fuel mitigation, uh, in doing that by just having animals kind of all over the county in different areas is kind of our thing. And I guess, um, sorry, let me, um, yeah, just like trying to reduce that fire fuel mitigation, I guess, is that, and that's kind of when we saw a big intake of like using the goats and sheep is after the big fires in Sonoma County, and it became like a more popular thing.
Absolutely. You've touched a bit on some of the next questions where we were thinking about, why using target grazing versus, seasonal or year-round grazing. I'm curious also if maybe you want to touch on like where the animals go. I think there's a quote Lynn Hensinger always says, like, you can't put a cow on a shelf, something like
Yeah,
that. That's something I
yeah.
think specific to targeted grazers. That's something of interest and maybe worth bringing up.
Yeah, so for like our winter season, we lease a piece of ground down in Fresno County from a couple of my cousins, and we put them out there during the winter. And then right now, we're actually bringing them all back in March, and we just start getting out on some projects. Um, you know, Mainly with like the water district. Sonoma County Water District will be at Spring Lake this year, starting in April. We just kind of rotate them around, and then um, just kind of different projects around the county to keep stuff going.
I
Get
think
everything done.
specifically with targeted grazing, if you're trying to decide, do I have a land management goal where year-round grazing might be beneficial versus targeted grazing? I think the easiest thing to know which one you have is really the size of your property, right? If we're looking at large acreage, right, those 100 acres, maybe 200 acres, year-round grazing might be a more beneficial opportunity for that landowner where specifically in this county, we do a lot of fire prevention work. So we're seeing smaller property sizes or homeowners with smaller acreage. And that's really where the targeted grazing becomes more beneficial, right? It's harder to stock livestock on properties that might be 1 to 2 acres, but it's really convenient or easier to do that targeted grazing practice where we can bring in 2 to 400 animals and then take them away. So we see the benefits of reducing those fuel loads specifically for fire prevention. The other reason or way we see targeted grazing to be very beneficial is when we're trying to target specific plant species. For example, we see star thistle is a really popular one. People are looking for alternative ways to manage some of these more invasive or unwanted plant species. And we can manipulate timing, intensity, frequency, and duration of grazing patterns and seasons to help manage some of these specific goals homers might have, like those, star thistle vegetation and stuff like that. And so I guess that really lays into the goals of the property owner, right? How do we decide targeted versus year-round land management? And I think that comes down to specific goals of property and landowners and what they envision and what they want. So just a little bit more on that.
Appreciate that perspective. So to implement all those things, and say the goals line up for targeted grazing, what would a landowner need to provide? What are you guys looking for? What do you have to see? What are the must-haves on a given property to implement targeted grazing?
The major thing is we need access to water. It is possible to do it without access to water, but it's just an added fee that is pretty costly. So that would be the big thing. And then just access getting in, being that we were going to bring a travel trailer in for the herder to stay in, the stock trailers for the animals, just making sure there's access. And, we'll definitely come out and take a look and like make sure that we can get in and stuff like that. Um, and then as well as like having like potential use for like guardian dogs. What is the area like? Is there predators in the area? Is there other dogs that are off leash a lot? We want to just kind of look at that kind of stuff. And then, but like that, the use of the guardian dogs is like kind of more on us, and we don't ask that the homeowner or property owner is like trying to figure that out. We'll decide if we want to use the dogs or not and stuff like that. So.
I think another thing that's really important just to note is that the infrastructure supplied by grazers can vary. And so for us, we are a company that supplies all the infrastructure needed. So that's the mobilization, the herder on site, someone to move fences, someone to supply water, the fencing. We supply everything, right? All we need is access to water. That can vary from grazing outfit to outfit. And so as a homeowner or property owner or manager, I think it's important to have discussions with your potential grazer based on what they supply and what they offer, because it can vary. So for us, like Chase mentioned, we really only need access to water, maybe even access to property. But that is a good conversation to have with any potential grazer, just to make sure you guys are on the same page based on what is provided and what you need to provide.
So I know, infrastructure and water access certainly is a challenge. Are there any other challenges that you guys see, in doing targeted grazing?
Um, we kind of already talked about it, but definitely like access, especially on the smaller projects. If there's not a spot to be able to park equipment or park the travel trailer for the herders to stay in, would be kind of the big thing. Um, and then just, you know, trying to have a good expectation and having people know that there's bumps along the way, and we're working hard to try to navigate those and have a successful grazing opportunity.
In terms of access, one thing I know that's come up with folks in the past is, if you have provided access to a property, say it's a 20-acre, 30-acre property, so, below the level that we'd necessarily see kind of more traditional cattle grazing, we want to see some grazing with targeted operation. You can get onto the site and there is some water that you can fill somewhere, but you want all of those animals to reach throughout that 30 acres. How is that something that you can work with, and how do you kind of address like a larger property that might have one access point and then that's it? You've got to turn around and then the rest
Yeah.
of it's up to you.
Yeah. So with like that, if we had like one access point for water and we're trying to graze 28 acres, then there's a couple different options. One, we have like a four-wheeler with like a water trough for the herders will keep that water shuttle back and forth. If it's just too far to go on a four-wheeler, then we also have multi-equipped like big water wagons that are 500 gallons. And so we can kind of fill those and pump them up hills or down hills or kind of stage them in different areas where we can kind of get to. That would be kind of what we would do. And unfortunately, we run a lot of hoses, as Lynn can attest to that. So, yeah, each herder pretty much has about 500 to 600 feet of hose that they'll use at any given time. And then we have more back at our house if they need more. So.
Um, So I guess kind of wrapping up with the last couple questions here, but what, for you all is, most important? Like if you want to have a takeaway message for landowners that are thinking about having targeted grazing, both in terms of what maybe you might need, what you would want to know from them, and then what they might want to know if they're unfamiliar with the process.
Yeah, I think, I mean, my big thing is just like insurance, right? Like that everybody is thinking about insurance because that's a big thing. Goats can get out, eat somebody's plants or anything like that. And so stuff like that is definitely big. Maybe like the goals that they're interested in, time of year, it needs to be grazed. Some people like it grazed early, some people like it grazed late. and just kind of what they're looking for. They want to graze once or twice or a multi graze type thing. Um, and then just like the cost and time like it'll take to complete that project. Um, just thinking about how much time they have and whatnot. And we don't necessarily need the homeowner there when we complete or start the project, but most people like that, which is nice for us just to make sure we can get started and going in the right direction. And then, yeah, I think that's about all I have.
I think the last thing, as we're going off of like the importance of having discussions with your grazers and everything, is every year it seems to get busier and busier, and we seem to be booking earlier and earlier. I know for us, our April through July was booked in October of 2024. And so if there's anybody interested in grazing, I would just say start conversations sooner rather than later. As popularity increases, our schedules seem to get fuller, and it never hurts to reach out early and start those conversations early with any grazer.
Well, thank you both so much. And definitely appreciate your perspective and experience on all things targeted grazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will move over to last but not least on this panel, but Sarah Kaiser coming in as an innovative community builder based in Sonoma County. And through her vision and leadership, she develops and implements community grazing cooperatives and collaborative land stewardship projects for resilient communities. And under the banner of Wild Oat Hollow, which is officially what's on the screen now, Sarah's community-based sustainable land stewarding concepts empower private landowners and public entities with the skills and support to use grazing ruminants, planned burns, and community education to steward their lands and commons to a healthy fire ecosystem. Sarah's expanded her collaboration to policymakers, fire marshals, CAL FIRE, RCDs, NRCS, Cooperative Extension, and Indigenous fire ecologists to build out regional and land stewardship projects. Thank you for being here, Sarah. If you want to tell us more about yourself, and yeah, isn't it fun to hear someone else where you're like, oh, okay, that's. But
the written words are very different than when someone reads it out loud. Yeah, thank you, Roxanne, for having this, and Patty too for making this happen. I really appreciate this conversation. I've learned a lot already in your presentation. So one thing that I know is that there's always more to learn, and livestock and landscapes and ecology teach us that every day. Keep observing, keep paying attention, because there's always more to learn. I guess as far as a little bit of background, I started out building community grazing cooperatives. I started with my own community. Kind of goes back to what Byron said, is you would go through rural residential communities or even large landscapes, and one property would kind of be heavily impacted by livestock. And then right next on either side, you might have really tall grass that needs tending. And that happened in my neighborhood in Pengrove. And I would walk around, and what was a resource to me and my livestock was a burden to some of my community members. So I just started knocking on doors and talking to people, and the sheep began to move around the community. And it also ingratiated relationships. It broke down barriers. We now have, potlucks a couple times a year. And we have kind of a fire resiliency plan, especially after 2017. And so I built this concept. I was funded by some private foundations, and then I got connected with the RCDs. They loved the concept, and it built out to regional grazing projects. And beyond just rural residential communities taking care of each other, it was ranchers next to homeowners. And how do we fund some infrastructure, which I'm going to go into later, so that we can have this ongoing in perpetuity. And some of the communities that maybe don't have infrastructure, don't have the time, energy to manage their own livestock, they come together as a community and hire Chase or one of our contract grazers. And then he's grazing that whole community, the whole neighborhood, making them all safe from wildfire. And instead of somebody having to pay Chase to come out and graze 5 acres, if the 10 community members come together, he's grazing 50 or 60, and the cost per acre goes down. So it's that kind of economic balance where vegetation management, ecological services, and getting everybody safe together, because fires don't stop at property lines, and neither do ecosystems. So it's kind of a broad stroke of where I started and kind of what it's building into.
And through that description, you've talked a little bit about kind of your role and all that. But if you want to expand on like services that you would provide to a landowner, like I know you have a lot of different hats, so feel free to wear all the hats or tell us
Yeah,
about each of
okay.
them.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I do a lot. So really, Sarah Kaiser of Wild Oat Hollow, anybody who's interested in grazing, who wants to learn about grazing, can reach out to me. Anybody who is thinking their neighborhood might benefit from this or they don't know how to build this out, I'm here and accessible. And again, I have grant funding to support my communities without you having to pay me. I'm a free resource to my communities. I also work in contract with our RCDs, and I'm going to talk about that again, the Land Smart Grazing Program. So we're developing a replicable program that we're moving it outside of our county to make it a regional program. And we're hoping to be able to create that can go to other RCDs in other regions because it's a place-based grazing tool to help for ongoing land stewardship. I also work a lot to and I'm going to talk, I'm wearing a lot of hats. So I'm going to talk about the funding more. So I'll try not to go too deep here because I feel as my goal is to train the funders. We have a lot of funders out there. We have a lot of wildfire resiliency grants where they want to fund a single treatment or a single application. And then 3-4 years later, everything looks exactly like it did before. We need to start thinking about maintenance and that this is an annual tending of the land, which living in a fire ecosystem, we need to do in perpetuity. And we need to find ways that it is economically viable for our landowners, for our livestock producers, for our contract grazers, for our urban cities. City of Petaluma is building out their grazing cooperative. We're going into their 3rd year. So I'm kind of the systems thinker and pushing funders to think differently and funneling those funds into our grazers and landowners so we can have long-term viable solutions to our land tending using all of the things that you talked about in my bio.
So if someone is interested in this approach, collaborative grazing, obviously they can reach out, but, what would you say, what are those ideal conditions that, will lend themselves to a successful program, and what would you say, what do you need to get started?
Yeah, I don't think there is an ideal condition. I think any landscape can benefit from this. I think it can fit to your community, your landscape, your perspective. Going outside, looking at the landscape, looking at like what's there. Like Byron said, if you go out and somebody next door has sheep, let's start figuring out how that can work because it benefits both of you for that livestock to move around. And the beauty of the shared livestock is you are practicing that targeted grazing naturally because the animals go from one property to the next. So you're getting impact and rest without a lot of work on everybody's plate. We have a lot of ranchers that are next to rural residential communities in which all we're doing, and that's one of the things we fund with Land Smart Grazing is a little bit of infrastructure so that those cows next door take care of the whole neighborhood. And I also have a focus on, supporting all of our agricultural communities and really trying to support local food systems, our local producers, so that we think about what, making sure that the producers, the grazers are supported and we keep them in an economically viable situation because it's so critical. So I would say anybody who's interested, it could work for you in some way or capacity. So go outside, walk around, look at your community. If you don't know what to do, that's when you contact me. If you don't know how to do it, that's when you contact me. I provide ongoing animal husbandry support, fencing support. I can do all of that stuff because there is a learning curve. If a community is getting livestock for the first time to do their management, I'm here to support them. So anybody can do this. And sometimes it's an agreement with different places, but start looking at your whole ecosystem all around you instead of just looking at your property because ecosystems and fires don't stop at properties. So thinking about that extension, and it really benefits all of us to have us working together on some way, and we can do it in a way that works for you and your community. I think really the one key thing is that there's somebody who's of interest to at least spearhead the beginning, like the one who's going to reach out to me and the one who's going to kind of be willing to take that leap or have enough passion to take that leap. Then the rest will come and I'll help you make that happen.
So I guess on the flip side, what are some challenges that you've seen or dealt with, and how did you deal with those?
Yeah. Couple of challenges is lack of infrastructure on a lot of these communities. A lot of rural residential communities were kind of taken over, were a piece of a ranch. And when they built, they removed all infrastructure. So lack of infrastructure and lack of the knowledge and skill set of the landowners to be able to take care of livestock. And that doesn't mean it won't work for them. That just means Chase goes out and does it and they pay him. So if you're new to livestock and fencing, there's a steep learning curve. So why isn't my portable electric fencing work? And if somebody is going to start their own where they get their own livestock, and there's several that have, and these are some of the community grazing cooperatives I've helped build out are in places where they're all lost their homes in 2017. They rebuilt and they got really afraid of fire. Once they had livestock on that land, they all feel safer. They know each other, they take care of each other, but they knew nothing about livestock. So I can help them find the right animals, because I will tell everybody here, if you don't know this already, there's no such thing as a free sheep. No such thing as a free cow. You go find cheap animals, you're going to have a hell of a time taking care of them. And they're maybe not trained to the fencing. So I make sure you get really easy to manage, trained animals that know how to stay in the fencing. I make sure they're hardy and healthy, good moms if you want to have a breeding program. Because what a lot of these communities have done is they've added in incorporating the food into it. So that sheep are providing veg management, but then everybody gets a lamb in the freezer as well. So the community's fed with vegetation management. So the hurdles are the biggest hurdles are being able to talk to your neighbors and how do we negotiate what's going to work for us. And I help with that. And I have a whole template of questions for you to ask your community as you build this out. And I can be a part of that. And if we're new to livestock, how do we do this? And I'm afraid, and what's the learning curve? And I help with all of those things. And if it's a rancher next door and funding, I'll go out there and chase down funding. That's kind of what I do. So reach out to me, and I do a lot of grant administration for forest health programs as well with one of my other hats. And one thing we really are finding is we're needing to push our funders like CAL FIRE to start funding maintenance programs. And one of the best maintenance programs is grazing. If we need to keep our fuel load down, grazing is a great tool to provide long-term. And part of that is pushing them to fund infrastructure so that grazing happens forever. And our livestock producer adds on that acreage with long-term contracts so they can know how much they have committed to growing their herd.
That's a huge piece. That's exciting. Are you working with CAL FIRE or the range management advisory committee?
I'm pushing on CAL FIRE really hard and working on CalCan, and CAL FIRE is getting a lot of the same feedback from other places. I think I just hopefully have a solution. It's just getting funders to shift to being willing to fund infrastructure, which historically they haven't been willing to do, because infrastructure was like helping a producer with their fencing, where now infrastructure is creating wildfire fuel breaks, creating long-term resiliency in wildfire. So once we start changing the language and understanding what that infrastructure is going to do, especially water infrastructure, because then you have firefighting capacity during fires, as well as water troughs, then infrastructure makes a lot more sense. So trying to just create the language around how this tool is going to work based on the funder's goals. Yeah.
Very exciting.
So I do tiny ones to big, huge ones, and I'm here to help.
Well, yeah, if there's any last things that you wanted to share, like, important things for them to know. I feel like you've given a lot of great tidbits there, but yeah, if there's any last thing that you wanted to share before we kind of open it up to some questions.
The one thing I would say that I find is most important is don't be afraid of moving forward because you don't know how it's going to work out or you don't know all the details. Like, don't let it have to be a perfect vision for you to be able to move forward. Once you start taking steps forward, I mean, it sounds silly, but it will happen. It will come together. The neighbors will come in. Some neighbors come in and flow out, and just be willing to begin moving forward without a perfect picture. And because we all need to do that, and that's how things manifest, in my experience.
Definitely, and the dovetailing too. I feel like Byron also had the don't let perfect be the end of you. Let's get the ground move here, get the ball moving.
Byron and I agree on that topic for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Byron and Chase and Emma, thank you guys for jumping back on. We do have one question in the chat that Lynn put out asking, is the place-based tool that Sarah mentioned Match.Graze or something else? And we can share about Match.Graze, which was developed by Cooperative Extension. And you can look it up, just Match.Graze. Just Google that and find your local grazer, find some grass. It's a great tool. Sarah, you shook your head, but
So, yeah, no, that's not what I was talking about. Mash.Graze is a good tool. What I was talking about is the place-based is kind of the community grazing cooperative concept that I help people build out. And I have a whole template that I can provide to people who are interested that has simple budgetary stuff, nothing quite as sophisticated as Byron. And I forgot to add that I wanted to thank both Byron and Chase because they are the money guys. They have all the budget, they understand all the stuff. I just talk about all the soft and fluffy stuff. So it's great that we all work together and bring different skill sets because that's the great thing about this work is part of our collaboration working together. So reach out to me if you want that. It's really kind of a conversation piece. It's also like for newbies, I create a list of supplies that you want for your livestock. It's like a whole toolkit that comes together for starting a new community grazing cooperative. And I can send that to you if you want it.
any other questions for the panel?
Yeah, so I do have a question. So my name's Tanya Meyer. I'm the program coordinator for the Yolo County Resource Conservation District Fire Program, and we have plenty of money and deliverables to reduce fuels through grazing. So I can't start a cooperative in my community because I live in town, but I'm trying to there's a few communities in our West County that need support and help. And they have not all like jumped on board as much as I thought they would. Some folks, Roxanne and I were at a meeting and some folks came to that meeting, but they're in the core of basically my question is like, what experience do you have coming in as sort of an outsider, not as a community resident, to try to support people and just getting a whole project going that they hadn't thought about? You know, lots of people are retired, they travel, like it's not their top priority, although they are terrified of wildfire and they should be in their high fire area. If that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, that's a lot what I do. Like mine started with my neighborhood, but I go into all different areas and help build bridges, keep the conversation, align people's concerns with how this will work for them, and create kind of comprehensive strategies for that community in a way that'll work for them and get them engaged. And I also think we have to be patient. Like we may not go in and the first conversation something happens. Like we all need to slow down. And anytime you work with livestock, you realize we need to slow down, sit down and chew, ruminate on things now and then. But sometimes I do think it's coming together, having a conversation, letting people say their concerns. That's the first step. And then you kind of move forward with maybe the few that are interested. And then you let others experience what's happening and they begin to want to be a part of it because it's working. So some people won't come in until they see it working, and that's okay. But starting where you are and engaging people in a conversation, getting their concerns, and then also letting them know this is how this could work for you. And funding always helps.
Yes.
When you have a little money behind the conversation, it's a much better option for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, well, I could do it for them and pay grazers for a couple of years, and then the grant will be over and the money will be gone. And like you said, it'll look the same. Mm-hmm. I really want to try to build it from the ground up.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. You want it to be able to go on in perpetuity. This land needs to be tended forever. We need to come back to being connected and tending the land. And I think that's a lot of what grazing does for people. And grazing cooperatives do. So, there's often ways forward. Do you guys have down in Yolo, do you guys have much of a contract grazing? A lot of businesses doing that work?
No.
Not really. Okay.
Or those people that'll graze like, alfalfa fields or orchard floors or stuff, but that not so much for fuels reduction.
Okay.
In the hills where there's more predators.
Right. Yes. The predators. Yeah.
Yeah, the predators. And I'm trying to know how your conversations with CAL FIRE are about funding infrastructure, but we can get to that in that section.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about.
Thank
I was
you.
going to ask the same. Is there another section? I don't know why I look really weird right now. A mix between inside and outside. Um, I work for the San Mateo RCD in the Forest Health. I'm just going to turn this off because looks real weird. I'm a project manager in the Forest Health and Fire group at San Mateo RCD. I'm still less than a year there, so still learning a lot about this county. I have spent my previous time in San Mateo or Contra Costa and Alameda counties, but I guess my question, Sarah, is about, I don't know if you were implying you're going to talk more about CAL FIRE grants later per Tanya's question, but just wondering about like the conversations you've had with CAL FIRE about maintenance down the road. Like forest health grants are what I most commonly work with. And yeah, those are like 3-year grants, right? And they're huge and great. And also 3 years is nothing. So, and I can circle back to you if this is a conversation to have later, but just wondering if you can speak to what headway you've made or where you think that at our individual RCDs, we can have conversations with our local CAL FIRE units, like where there's some cracks and some potential in the conversation.
Absolutely. My next presentation is like 20 minutes on funding, so I'll definitely dive into that and you'll have questions. But that's something I will be talking about. And so we'll dig deeper on that next presentation.
Great, thank you.
But that's good.
Any last lingering questions? It's a great group of experience. I really appreciate all these questions, both from the participants, the panelists. It's been really interesting. All right.
Roxanne,
Yeah.
since there's not another question, I just wanted to reference something about what Tanya said about the grazing groups and Sarah, because I feel like there's an analog to incentivizing cattle operators who are also often landowners, is that so much in life is about opportunity cost and appropriate incentive. And I often find that a lot of the programs that are available, for instance, for landowners, like the administrative load is high and the benefits are hard to accrue, or maybe they're not sizable enough. Or for a cattle operator, like maybe you're part of a program, whether it's organic or like some sort of value added program, and the incentive isn't really aligned to the administrative load and effort load. And so when I think about those communities, I think a couple of things. One is, are whatever the benefits are being described as large enough? And maybe it's just like, like pants on fire. Like, do you want to be on fire, type thing. And then the other thing, and I didn't really cover it too much in my presentation, is like one of the most important things we do is work with motivated landowners. And I think like what Sarah was saying is so big, is like get 2 people together that really care and have a lot of fun doing it. And those are going to be your anchor tenants anyway. Those are going to be your champions. Like, it's also not that you shouldn't work with reluctant people, but reluctant people, like often I feel like that's an indicator species for a pain in the butt later. And so I just like start where you're at, properly incentive, work with good people, was something that just like popped up for me when you were talking about that.
You nailed that.
Roxanne, could I throw in a question?
Oh, please do.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So my name is Jana Olson and I work in regenerative agriculture, and I just completed some amazing study with Sarah Kaiser. She's awesome and has been studying with us in an event down at Tomcat Ranch for a few months through San Mateo RCD. So thanks, guys. Byron, I remember meeting you during that training and being wholly impressed by your operation and everything you shared with us. And I loved your statement earlier today about regenerative agriculture and higher stocking rates and all of the labor involved in trying to move those animals through the landscape being a losing battle. And I'd love it if you would speak a little bit more on, now that we're talking about funding, And we're talking about funders identifying and understanding the merits, whether they are from an ecological perspective or ultimately from a profit perspective. Can you or Sarah talk about moving funders in a direction that might support that, or why, for example, as I think you stated to me, you wouldn't want to do that in the first place? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Sarah, do you want to take a first crack at that? Or what do you, no?
Sorry, the mute. I was like, you go first, I'll jump in.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I think, all right, so I'll give 30 seconds on the basis of that calculation. So I've run the economic models of if you move your cattle every single day and you get 50% more yield, like what does it look like? And the problem is that you're giving up the opportunity cost of the other job you could have for those hours. So instead of working 1 day a week for 8 hours a week, now all of a sudden you have to quit your other job. And if you can run 1,000 acres, you can also go work for Gelati and make $170,000 a year. That's just like the way it is. And so in addition to that, you're adding the labor cost, opportunity cost aside, right? You're adding the labor cost of every day. And people are expensive. So once you put 40 plus hours in a week, all of a sudden, even though your yield goes up, your costs just make the whole thing tank. And I've run a ton of other models around this as well, and we could talk more about them later. And I think one of the core challenges is we don't actually know like where the needle is, and not that we'll ever know, but like we don't exactly know how much regenerative effort you need to get an ROI, both on the natural capital and both on the economic capital, if that makes sense. And so the problem is we talk about regenerative agricultural management behaviors in kind of like a big term. Everything falls into that category, and then we proselytize it, or we say it is good, but actually like it's a collection of a bunch of different individual management behaviors, all that have different impacts on the landscape. And here's like the dirty little secret is like there's actually not a lot of analysis on vegetation monitoring and biological monitoring and grazing management and how those two things intersect, and removing confounding variables of weather, slope, soil type, like these kinds of things, right? And so we actually don't know like we have some like general things we can say, right? Like if something's hammered, it's hammered. But I say that in context, like there's a group of us working on trying to actually analyze that information. Tomcats in the mix, white buffaloes in the mix, Piscinus is in the mix, and we're trying to connect all those pieces of data so we can say like, what's the regenerative ROI on this, not only in terms of natural capital, but also on the economics. And then, last part of your question is just like how do we find those funding mechanisms, And it's tough because like a lot of landowners can't afford to assume the management load for these increases in natural capital. So some landowners can. We work with a lot of those landowners, but I think that's where like folks like Sarah come in, RCD comes in for finding money to try and support. But once again, it gets back to that incentive piece. Like, is it enough money to support? I don't know if that exactly answers it, Janet. It was really great to meet you at that meeting as well. I remember walking and talking. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is right on. It's kind of like regenerative agriculture. The concept is kind of like Instagram. It looks really pretty, but it's a lot of fluff, honestly, because yes, if we're actually expecting people to produce food and do all of these practices without any real tangible like improvement, and like he said, there's a lot of places like Piscines, Tomcat, who luckily have a lot of money to put in to this research, but our producers do not. And we're expecting people to produce food and with really, really high levels of burnout. So everything Byron said is really right. And we just have to be careful what line we're treading and what we think we can accomplish when grazing is a really good tool, but it is one piece of an ecosystem, and drought and water and slope and all the other things he talked about are a big piece of that too. So you can't expect one tool to change everything when there's all these other incorporated things. As far as funding goes, Funding's tough, and we're going to talk about that more, but that's why I like working with the RCDs, and I like working with agencies or like even fire safe councils, other agencies that are able to do that kind of grant administration work and funnel it down to a simpler, easily accessible amount of money. Well, accessible money, not amount, but accessible money in which you're not having to like sell your soul to get that money. And it's very technical and there's lots of input. So the streams to private landowners need to be improved, and that's a big part of what I hope I can do is make funding more accessible through organizations that can manage those funds. I mean, it's a big dream, so I tend to have big dreams and just hope they all come together. So wish me luck for all that.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both. I'm here to help in that in any way I possibly can. So I'm going to follow up with you down the road. Thanks.
Thank you, Yana. If there were any last questions, maybe we'll hold them for the very end, which we'll have all of our speakers available to talk a little bit more about that.